What I wanted to talk about today. First of all, welcome to the Jesus Revolution. Yay! I do that every single time. It's good. What I want to preach to you today actually is Isaiah's message. I'm preaching it. He gave me some really good stuff this morning, and so a lot of this stuff that I'm going to talk about, actually, just so you know, I got it from Isaiah. I mean, it was pretty amazing when he was telling me. I was like, wow, that's really good. I'm going to preach that.
You think your son Isaiah?
Oh yeah, my son's name is Isaiah. I'm not referring to the book of Isaiah, which is also a very good book, and there's a lot of good things in there. The prophet Isaiah did not come and talk to me. That would be pretty amazing. No, Isaiah, my son, who possibly could be a prophet, he came to me. We'll put it that way. It is funny. I didn't even think about that. Isaiah. Everybody starts turning to their Bible to the book of Isaiah. I'm like, no, my son Isaiah. If you want a scripture to turn to, just because I like doing that while I'm talking, because it gives you something to do, go ahead and turn to Hebrews chapter 2. There was a poster that I saw this last week, and if Marvel or somebody from Marvel is watching this, I'm probably going to be sued for stealing their title. But for the title of my message today is something I got off of one of their posters. It says, "A man without fear has no limits." And you think, well, what's that have to do with comic books? There's a comic book called Daredevil. And it's kind of interesting because the poster had it, and you ever see something, and it just, I don't know, maybe it's because I preach, I just catch things like that. But I just saw it, and I was like, whoa, a man without fear has no limits? That's amazing. And that's what's the name of I guess it's the next comic book arc or something in Daredevil. They're doing this little bit, that's what they were advertising for it. But do you guys know who Daredevil is, by the way? Okay, well, let me explain to you about Daredevil. Daredevil's an interesting comic book character, and I never really liked him much, and it's kind of for a bad reason. I don't know if I should say why I don't like him much, but anyways, I'm just going to tell you about him. You always have, the funny toxic waste thing. Well, for some reason back in the 60s, I don't know what it was about radiation and toxic waste. Guys who wrote comics had some sort of fixation on this stuff, like, let's use toxic waste, let's use radiation. Well, basically, a kid, he was younger when it happened to him, he gets toxic waste on his face, goes blind, right? But his senses are enhanced. And so he's able to, like a bat almost, able to see sound or whatever, So Daredevil is this comic book character who basically, and there's a lot of other stuff that happened to him in his past with Kingpin. I'm not going to go into much detail on that. But just basically, he gets toxic waste on him. He becomes blind. His senses are enhanced, and he's able to see, kind of like with sonar or whatever. But one of the interesting things, he gets together with a guy, they call him Stick, I guess, right? Thing with a stick or something. Guy that ran around beat people up with a stick, I guess. But he was a martial artist, and he taught Daredevil how to fight without using his eyes. And one of the things that and this is what the thing that I really like about Daredevil. And I say his character is okay, never really impressed me, but the thing that I like, the power that made him the most interesting wasn't the fact that he could see without, with being blind. He was blind, but he could still see things because of the sound or whatever. And it wasn't just that he, had this amazing fighting abilities, and, he was just this, for being blind, he was pretty darn amazing, let alone, even if he wasn't blind, he'd still be amazing. He was just an amazing character. But what always kind of interests me about him is the power that I think was probably the most important is he had no fear. He literally had no fear. This guy, Stick, who was a martial artist, taught him about what fear did to people. It kept people from doing the things that they really want to do, or keep them from doing the things that they need to do. That fear, people that didn't fear had nothing to lose. They lived a life without nothing to lose. They weren't afraid of dying. They would take these chances, and because of that, they were able to do anything. They had no limits because they lived without fear. And that's one of the things about Daredevil. I mean, the guy's jumping off buildings and he's blind. I mean, good gosh, I mean, but, that's the way he lived. And that's basically what this, a man without fear has no limits. That's what it's talking about. I mean, he had no fear. No fear. And you think, well, you mean he's just not afraid? No, it's not just not being afraid of something. He did not have fear. Fear wasn't a part of his life. Like how you ever stand up on top of something high and you look down and you kind of get that, oh my gosh kind of feeling, right? Or for instance, if we go to Six Flags, right, Maroon, well, they have the little bungee thing, and you kind of get that, I don't want to do that, that fear. He didn't have that. Nothing bothered him. He didn't have that fear thing. Number one, probably because he didn't trust in his eyes like we do. He had to trust in other senses, and so things didn't bother him like it bugs us. But He had nothing to lose. He was a man, he figured, hey, I can't see, what's the worst going to happen to me now? I mean, there's nothing I can lose here. What's the worst? I could die? It didn't matter to him, okay? But one of the things this guy talked about, the martial arts stick he taught him, was that they can accomplish anything if you get rid of fear. And I thought that was an interesting thought, that man without fear has no limits. Man without fear has no limits. You guys ever heard the story? Well, I like Greek mythology, I'm sorry, and so does Isaiah. So like I said, most of this is his message because he gave me this information. You guys ever heard about Phobos? Phobos. Phobos is where we get the word phobia from. Phobos was the Greek god of fear. What's interesting is basically Zeus he was a child of Ares, and Zeus made Ares go have a kid, with somebody else, and his kid's name was Phobos. And the interesting thing was Zeus wanted this god, this little child god here to exist, because he knew that man could challenge the gods. He knew that man, and he needed them to be afraid. And it's interesting in the story here that the oracles, if you know much about Greek mythology, these little, the women, the ones that shared the eyeball, right? Yeah, they all have one eye and they kind of share it. But they were able to see into the future and see, whatever. But they said that basically they talked about a time, they called it the twilight of the gods, that eventually man would rise up and overthrow the gods. They would go, and the prophecy was they would go into hell where Phobos was, and they would overthrow Phobos, so then they wouldn't have fear anymore to go and to challenge the gods. And I thought that was kind of interesting that, that Zeus knew that if man was afraid of something, if there was fear in their life, it would keep them from accomplishing great things. And I just started thinking, that is, that once fear was destroyed, once and for all, once they destroyed fear, they could rise up to Mount Olympus and overthrow the gods. And even Zeus, one of the major gods there, knew that. And I thought it's such an interesting thought. But that's true. A man without fear has no limits. A man without fear has no limits. The thing that robs us, you've been talking about dreams, and that's kind of what, we talked last week and talked about dreams and things that keep you from your dreams. And I think one of the things is, fear will keep you from living your dreams. Fear will keep you from living to to the best that God has for you. Because we're afraid. We think that we can't accomplish things. We think that, when God gives us something, I could never have this or I can never have that. It's sad. And look at this in Hebrews chapter 2. Fear. Now, I've preached about fear a million times, but I'm going to talk about it in a different way. And I'm going to tell you this honestly, this message. I put it together this morning because I had something else I'm going to preach about, but I like this a lot better. So you're not going to get your 3-point sermon. I'm just going to preach at you if that's okay. You guys okay with that? Let me hear an amen. No, I'm joking. You get an amen? No, I'm joking. Hebrews chapter 2. Let's start here. And I told all you guys to turn there, so you're already there. You're one step ahead of me. I guess I should put little markers in my Bible so I can just turn right to it and look like, I know exactly where it was. Okay, Hebrews chapter 2. I want to start in verse 14. It says, Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14. Since then the children share in flesh and blood, Jesus is talking about he himself, Jesus likewise partook of the same, that through death he might render powerless him who had the power of death, that is the devil, that he might deliver those who through fear of death were subject to slavery all their lives. Fear will oppress you. Why? Because you're afraid of something. You're afraid of dying. I mean, really, seriously, when you think about it. Why? Okay, let's say, for instance, you have a fear of flying. Okay, you win a trip to Hawaii. Well, I don't want to go to Hawaii because, I don't want to get on a plane. Right? Well, what are you afraid of? Really, what are you afraid of if you get on a plane? You're going to die, right? What about people who won't go on certain roller coaster rides? Well, I mean, if you don't want to get sick, that's understandable. But really, why? I don't want to go on that ride. Well, why not? Why? Because you're afraid of what? That the roller coaster's going to crash, you're going to die. You see what I'm saying? It all goes back to death. Fear is bound in death. You see, and death, and it says is the power of death, it's from the devil. It's demonic. Fear is perverted faith. I preached this before, and it's worth saying again. Fear is perverted faith. It's the exact same thing as faith, but it's faith in death instead of faith in life. It's believing that something bad is going to happen to you, even though you don't see it, you don't know it yet, you haven't experienced it, you haven't experienced, you have this fear that something bad is going to happen to you.